Hello, everyone. I'm here with a special interview. This is James, who's going to talk to us about regional conventions. He was a parent as a Jehovah's Witness, going to regional conventions. That's what this topic is going to be about. As you see, my backgrounds is like the celebrity regional convention of the Polo Grounds. My mother actually went to the Polo Grounds and in Yankee Stadium when she was a girl. And my mom's old, by the way. She's 79. And so she went to those conventions, and as a witness, that was kind of like a celebrity status, and everyone's like, she's like better than everyone else. But they're not here to talk about my mom. But why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Take 5 minutes. So how did you become a witness in the first place?
Well, hello everybody. First of all, I'm James again, and I was born in as a witness. My dad was always an elder from the time I could remember. Grew up in it, didn't know anything else, basically. So as a child growing up, was always at the conventions, always at the assemblies. I believed it. I was, hook, line, and sinker as a teenager into my early 20s that this was the truth, this is it. And so, yeah, that's how I came into it.
Okay, elder son, that means you were evil. Okay, good. See, my dad was disfellowship most of my upbringing, so I was always treated like garbage, and all the elder sons always got like special treatment in the congregation.
I don't feel like I ever got special because my dad was always more like the black sheep of the elder body.
Okay.
So he actually had care and concern for people and didn't always follow the rules to the strict, rigid ways that everybody else did. So because of that, I wasn't ever getting any special treatment growing up either.
Okay. And what was some of the major factors of why you left?
Well, and to sum that up shortly, the big number one thing for me was when I watched the Australian Royal Commission.
Okay.
And when Jeffrey Jackson testified and he got up on the witness stand and started lying. Now, I have some not personal experience, but it's my wife was abused by another elder in her congregation as a child.
Okay.
And knowing how they handled that from her experience, firsthand experience, and also after we first got married, brief story here, this guy struck again. And we were in a different congregation at the time. And she was actually called to come and testify as a witness against this guy. And I was like, I want to say.
And relive it all again and stuff?
22, 23 when this happened. Yeah, relive it all again. And so we went to that congregation and we're sitting there testifying. She was sitting there testifying. And this guy was sitting there blaming her for what he did to her. And so putting that all together, and then the Australian Royal Commission, and seeing that this is not just some localized incident that happened, that there's a much larger problem. And then, like I said, seeing Jeffrey Jackson lie about other things on that witness stand, at that point, that was my fuck it all moment. I'm done.
Yeah.
I ain't going back to this shit. I got to figure out how to get myself and my family out of this completely. And my wife, fortunately, she was never believed it for a long time. So getting her on board with me to leave was real easy. One day she asked me if I believed it anymore. And I'm like, well, this was after I made my mind up. I'm like, here's do or die, because we were living close to her parents, who her mom's a pioneer, her dad's an elder. So we were kind of close to them, and it was kind of hard to say it, but I was like, no, I don't believe it anymore. And then she was just like, okay. And from that point on, we made our escape plan. We were living in Tennessee at the time and moved back to Virginia because the job situation was better here. So
That's interesting. You like opened up like all this stuff that we could easily talk about, because all these questions popped in my mind. I never even heard this before. And I was like thinking like, well, why did you watch the Australia World Commission in the first place?
well,
That's forbidden.
Well, the thing was, I'll answer that real quick, because I was on, at the time when I was living in Tennessee there, I was having a lot of car problems. And so I was on YouTube a lot, looking up car repair videos to try to be, because I work on my own stuff. I always do my own mechanics whenever I can within my abilities. And I was just scrolling through the feed one day, and all of a sudden I saw videos about Jehovah's Witnesses popping up. I hadn't searched for any, mind you. I had not searched for any videos of the sort, but they were popping up on my feed. Well, like a little kid, I got curious. So tap on one, start watching it, oh my God. And I watched it for a little bit. I'm like, I shouldn't be watching this. I stopped it. Yeah. But what I heard made sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, if that's true and that makes sense, and I was checking the stuff that they were saying, let me go watch a little more, and then a little more. And finally I found like the John Cedars channel. Mm-hmm. And that's where I heard about the Australian World Commission. I binged watched all his videos.
Wow.
And Kim and Mikey, Susan Gaskin, because they're all in that same realm. I was just like, man, these people are making a lot of sense. And then at first I was like looking up the articles they would quote and the scriptures and, verifying what they were saying was true. And it all was. After a while, I'm like, I don't got to look this up no more. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is all confirming the elder son rebellious. Okay, good. I do what I want. Got to protect me. I'm just joking.
No, my already left. My parents left in 2010.
Well, you're kind of fortunate in your little situation. You got your wife and did you have issues with your kids when you left?
A little bit, yeah. The biggest thing they were worried about was going to be the relationship with the grandparents on my wife's side.
Okay.
And we had some good talks with them. And one good thing that happened, or I should say didn't happen, is none of my kids ever got baptized.
Okay.
So we put the reassurance on them that grandma and grandpa will still talk to them, and they do. Not like they used to, but they still do talk to them. And so they have that reassurance that, they can still have somewhat of a relationship with them, and it won't be totally tragic. So I guess in a way that it was about as best of an outcome as you can expect for this situation.
Yeah, it's interesting how witnesses view that baptism, and if you think of people like XW Fifth or Cliff Henderson, for instance, who he got baptized at 9, which I always was offended by, even when I was in. I don't know why. I guess it was just kind of like my conscience kicking in there saying this is inappropriate for someone to make that kind of lifelong commitment. It is interesting. Well, since we're on topic of regional convention, this was one of the major things there was the fact that people got baptized there. And witnesses, if you did not get baptized, will hold you to a different standard if you did, even though you got baptized as a minor, as a child. When did you get baptized?
I was 13.
13. That's still pretty young. I was almost 16. And I remember having immense pressure on myself to get baptized by 16 because if you got baptized after 16, you're like a heathen, and like, oh, you don't take the truth seriously. Your parents are bad parents, and all this other nonsense. That's how it was in California. And so when it came to regional conventions, this came to my idea when it got canceled. This is my first time in my lifetime, and I think if Jehovah's Witnesses history that it's ever been canceled worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so regional convention is a big deal. Like the picture behind me, my mom went here. This was 8 days, I think. Yeah, 8-day convention. I couldn't imagine doing that like that. For us, 3 days, right?
Yeah, 3 days was all I ever knew, which that was enough.
Okay.
Especially as an adult with kids, I was, oh my God.
Okay, so how did you like going to conventions as a kid?
As a kid, generally, yes. I was a social butterfly, I guess. I wasn't like close with a lot of people, but I knew a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so it was always nice walking around, saying hi to people. You know, I always enjoyed that kind of, just talking and stuff. And of course, like I mentioned before we started recording, as a teenager, looking at the girls in their tighter dresses and stuff at these events, because that was, my thing. But,
Yeah. Well, I
you know,
never had that privilege. I was dealing with being gay and being confused. So, so no, that was not my thing. And so,
well, your brother probably wore tighter pants at those things too.
not at their tight points. Tony said no, they can't do that no more. But well, I was too busy trying to shove that down, and so I was just like, no, that's not, you can't do that, And so it was just kind of, it was weird to me for that matter. But it's funny that you mentioned that. So growing up, going to the conventions, do you remember like long drives to get there, or was it pretty close for you?
Well, at first, when I was young, the place we went to was about an hour drive away.
Okay.
So we never stayed at a hotel. We just drove back and forth every day.
Okay.
And then finally that place got demolished and we had to move to another city, that was in Kissimmee, Florida. And that was about a 2-hour drive. And of course, if you're going through that traffic near Orlando there, it could be more going down the interstate. So we had to start getting a hotel to go there. And so we would generally get a hotel within, 5 or 10 minutes of the convention facility then.
Yeah. Were you baptized at a regional convention or a assembly?
I was baptized at a convention, actually. The Bayfront Center down in St. Petersburg before it got demolished.
Okay. Okay. I was baptized in a Jehovah's Witness built assembly. That means I had better water than you. And I used to think that.
Now.
I was like, oh, the regional conventions, that's not built by us. It's kind of weird, the things you think about. And so in the regional conventions, for instance, growing up, if we had a drive, like mine were in San Francisco growing up in California. And the poorer families drove back and forth and they had to suffer in the traffic. And so people are like, well, how long does it take you to get to San Francisco? Well, without traffic on a miracle day, it would be 45 minutes. But sometimes it could be 2.5 hours if there's an accident or something like that, And so I remember driving to San Francisco being a real big pain. I remember some of the families with more money got to stay in the San Francisco hotels, which are obviously more expensive than most places. I couldn't imagine also staying like in New York, for instance, where the hotels are going to be like 100, 150 bucks a night. Most families can't afford that.
Mm-mm.
And, people don't realize that, as a Jehovah's Witness child, you're waking up probably at 6 a.m.,
Yep.
and you're like waking up, you're like brushing your teeth, and like trying to make yourself somewhat presentable, and you got to put on a suit and tie. And then you got to experience some of the lunches at the conventions as a
Yes.
kid. And do you
Yes.
remember the blue tickets?
I don't remember us having tickets. We always just, from what I remember, we always just went up and they had, I guess, a pretty proportioned amount that they gave you, and that was it.
That's what happened eventually, but originally you had tickets you had to purchase. And then they're like, oh, you can't have this. This is a concession stand now because now you're selling stuff. And so witnesses, whenever they get in trouble with money, they always have to change the rules. And then they use some kind of twisted scripture to say, oh, no, now we're being benevolent, and nice to people. And that's kind of how the new light. And so then, so you had like this picture right here, my mom worked in the kitchens to get fed because her family didn't have any money. Her dad was not a witness, and so he did not support it one bit, probably because his wife joined a cult, so there was that problem. But she worked in the kitchens with her mom and her brothers, and they were able to eat for free that way at this point, because back then they were still charging. And you can imagine with cheap food, you actually probably could bring in a lot of income that way, with free labor and all that nonsense. And so when did you get married?
I was, I was 21. I was only a couple weeks away from being 22 when I was married. And this
Okay.
was in 2004.
Yeah.
So I got married on July 3rd, and my birthday was July 12th. So I was real
Okay.
close to being 22 when I got married. But my wife was 18. So
Okay. Well, this is pretty typical of witnesses, though, for
yeah.
people who
Oh,
are
yeah.
not, getting married. I mean, 22 was actually, that's when my brother got married too. And his wife was, I think, 20,
Well,
and
in retrospect, in my family, because I have my brother, my dad, and my grandfather were actually all younger than me when they all got married. So I was the oldest one in
yeah.
our family to get married.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't too shocking for 17-year-olds to get married in the
No.
witnesses. I mean, it was kind of looked down upon. You're like, well, that's still a little young, but whatever, it's better than them fornicating, and that's kind of how everyone thought. Did the regional conventions change after you were married in a way, or did it get easier?
Well, right after I was married, it changed because now I had somebody to walk around with and be with.
Yeah.
So as far as like my days of, stargazing, I guess you could say, that kind of went away. But you know, and it kind of changed in a way because like my wife isn't as social as a person as I am. And so we would talk less to people around there, but it was still pretty much the same in a way at that
Okay.
point. Of course, no kids at that point yet.
Yeah. And so, how long till you had your first child?
We were married about 2 years before we had our first child. So
Okay. And what was going to regional conventions with the baby like?
that was a bigger challenge because, not only are you dealing with a child getting up early in the morning, you're dealing with a baby getting up early in the morning.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure they're fed and they're cleaned up and changed, and then you got to get yourself ready. Most of the times the way I packed, I always had to iron my clothes at the hotel before I wore them that day. So there was a lot of preparation going into it. Of course, then you got to get breakfast, and then you got to get all your stuff together, make sure you have your diaper bag, food for the baby, your blankets, your wipes, and
Yeah.
then you're as well on top of all this. So it's like you're moving into the convention center every day with all the stuff you got to carry in just to take care of a child. And so, and then also seating. Now, I was fortunate because um, my at this point, all the conventions we went to was the same ones my in-laws would go to, and my father-in-law was always the head of the attendance department and everything. And
Okay.
so he would make sure he saved seats for us. So we always
Special
had
privileges, like I said.
exactly special privileges. So we were fortunate in that aspect that we always had seats. But if I didn't have that, we'd come in and we'd probably have to get the nosebleed seats with a baby in our hands. So I can only imagine the parents that had to go through that all the time. It's a
Yeah.
lot of exercise going up and down them stairs with a kid, let me tell you.
And then you decided to have more.
Yeah.
Okay. And so by when that happened, though, then you had a toddler at least, right? Because what you
Right.
said, like 11, 13?
Yeah. So my first two are 2 years apart. Yeah.
Correct. So then you had a 2-year-old sitting down in a chair for 8 hours, essentially, probably restless, I would imagine, and then you have a baby too, and that makes it more difficult. Because to me, the biggest pain about regional conventions was preparing food. Because if you were in a hotel, you had nowhere to cook, you had nowhere to make anything, and so what were you going to do? My solution to this, and this only worked on Friday and Saturday because Sundays they opened later, was I stopped by Subway on the way, got a breakfast sub and a lunch sub in the same place. That was my efficiency of it. And so, or if I was going to the same convention as my mom and my father, my mother would make me lunch. Moms always do that forever. And so that was nice. And so that was the biggest inconvenience to me. But you're doing this for 4 people,
Hmm.
and so then you got to coordinate that stuff. Were you also like a ministerial servant or anything like that? Uh,
Not at the time I got married. No, see, I was a ministerial servant before I got married, but then I dated a girl before my wife, and who I went to pioneer school with, and we fooled around a little bit, so I got removed as a
Oh
servant.
my God.
I know. Oh no. And it wasn't even anything, all the way kind of stuff, but it was enough
Yeah,
to
it's JW fooling around, which is kind of like the first date for everyone else. But
pretty much. Well, so I got removed as a servant after that, and then, at that point in my life, I moved out of my parents' house because my parents moved away, and I didn't want to go with them. And I was living with another single brother who was in his 50s at the time, and and I was just working, and I made some new friends and hanging out, and then I ended up meeting my wife while I was still on reproof the first time. So
yeah, that sounds good. I was saying is if you also had the kids, wife, plus being like an attendant, for instance, because I don't know if you've ever been an attendant. That means you got to be there at 7.
yeah, I've been an attendant. Well, because what was funny before when I was a servant and I was an attendant, you know how I mentioned my wife's dad was the head of the attendants at the conventions?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, he has a very distinct hairstyle that even years later you'll remember because it's still the same. And I remember when I met her and I saw her dad for the first time, I'm like, oh, he's the head of attendance.
Okay. Oh, yeah,
And
yeah,
now
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
dating his
Okay.
daughter.
Oh, great. That's a lot of pressure in that sense. But
Yeah.
so that would be, so I'm trying to, empathize with other fathers and mothers out there. And especially, I remember a lot of sisters complaining that their husbands were doing too much at the regional conventions, for instance. And they were at the hotel, these were just women, they had all the kids with them on their own because dad was an attendant and had to be there at 6
Mm-hmm.
o'clock. And, and he has to have that title, to have any kind of respect in the congregation. And she wants him to have the respect too, because if he doesn't, then she looks down upon it. It's a big, huge maelstrom of just nonsense, of gossip, and other stuff. And so you're just kind of always under pressure as a witness to perform in some way. And so that's going to make it even further. So if you think people are with kids, with a wife, driving there for a long distance, and they're going to have to be there at 7 o'clock to be an attendant, or if you had parking, which was even worse, that was like they always give that job to somebody who can barely handle mics, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and oh, you want to reach out more? Well, let's make you be a parking lot attendant. You're up there. In San Francisco, it's freezing. So,
And in Florida, you're burning your ass off, or you're getting wet because it's raining.
okay, yeah, and so it was kind of like the job for like newly baptized teenagers usually. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's just all this different pressure and things like that. And so you don't need to get too much into your finances, but what kind of financial burden is this to a father who's providing for his family, and then you have like a
Well, I
regional
mean,
convention to plan for?
well, at first, when we first had kids, um, you know, I wasn't making a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
I was working at a hospital at the time, and I was fortunate because I could kind of work my schedule out where I didn't miss any work at all because we only worked 3 days a week. And so I was able to work my schedule so I wouldn't miss any work for that week and still go to the convention for that weekend then. But then as they started getting older, I changed careers totally, and I became a welder. And so
Yeah.
now I'm working 5 days a week, working, all sorts of overtime a lot. And then, just getting the time off could be just a stressful thing because you've got companies that need to meet their schedules and need certain amount of workers to, get X amount of work done by a certain time. And then you got me saying, hey, I need to have this weekend off and Friday as well. I was
Yeah.
never one of those ones who could take Thursday off too to prepare the day before because that would just be too much out of my paycheck every week because,
Yeah.
I got bills to pay. I usually need my full week's check, if not more, to pay my bills.
Yeah.
So that alone is a burden, let alone, you know, even with my wife, you'd always want to get some new clothes every year for the convention
Well,
because
there's
that was everybody
pressure.
time to go shopping and get new dress clothes, and then you got to get hotels. You got to pay for the food, especially if you're traveling. Like you said, the most of the hotel rooms I ever got never had a kitchen, so we always did the same thing. Got a sub or something the night before to pack our lunch. But I mean, you're talking a sub. It's on average $7 to $10 per sandwich,
Yeah.
and you got to
Five
do that.
people.
Not only do you got to do that for lunch 3 times a week, but then you got to get breakfast. Most of the hotels we got, we always try to make sure we had the continental breakfast, so
Yeah.
that saved us a little bit there. But then you still have to go get dinner every night too,
Correct.
and it's not like I'm going to go to a sit down restaurant every night and pay $50-$60 for everybody to eat.
Yeah. No, you're right. And many people still did. And it's funny you mentioned taking time off work. My father was a roofing contractor, and I actually did roofing contracting myself for about 8 years with my brother. And I remember the days where people were like, well, what's your schedule like? Well, your schedule's not really your own. It's really what your customers demand,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's always deadlines. And when it comes to construction, to me, at least as a contractor, you're either really, really busy or really, really slow. And so you're kind of just like crossing your fingers, in summertime, which is typically when you're busy because everyone's trying to get things done. Uh, it, I mean, there was many times when you heard stories as a witness of people quitting their jobs to go to a regional convention because Joe will provide, and everyone's like, oh my God, he's so faithful, and it was just like, so you got like this praise to be a martyr,
Yeah.
and we won't even get into the blood thing. That's a different martyrdom. But and just like so many people were like, well, I didn't get my time off. And witnesses think that like the problem with witnesses is they think everyone else kind of thinks like they do because that's all they know. And so like your employer is like, well, this is kind of weird to me that you need to go to this 3-day convention every year. Most Christian faiths don't require this out of their members, and most people have no idea what this is like. And so the fact that I remember some people splitting it up, but that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of looked down upon because you weren't able to be used in the convention. And when I was the ministerial servant, I got there either on Wednesday or Thursday to help set up so I can walk around with all the elite people. And so I was trying to get up that ladder, and so
Oh yeah.
and so it was a 5-day thing for me. And although I was single, obviously, I was going to get married, but and so it wasn't that big of a deal to me, and to just take off work. And by that time, I was kind of switching over to restaurants. And restaurants is really easy to get time off work, and you can just always find somebody to cover your shifts because everyone always wants to work more, usually, And so that was pretty simple for me to do that. And so the financial burden was there, but I kind of treated it like a vacation. And as I mentioned, the international convention in 2014, we had a 100-year anniversary when Jesus became king. And I believe they're already revising that book, by the way, Let God's Kingdom Come. But so I went to the international in Frankfurt, Germany, and we did like about a
you were
month.
you were there with my in-laws because they went to that same one.
Okay, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I was a delegate, and I had a great time. I really enjoyed it. But the most expensive part of my trip was staying at the hotels they provided for me, and that
Mm-hmm.
was about $128 a night with their discount.
Yeah, and heaven
You,
forbid you get your own hotel.
oh yeah, you couldn't do that because you had to be in those hotels because they had the buses picking you up to take you different places, which I understood the logistics of. That's fine. And but we went to Italy, we went to Austria for much cheaper, on that same trip. We were there for a month. It was like 6 days in Frankfurt, Germany. And by the time, right before I left entirely, I was staying in Airbnbs, not their hotels. Airbnbs are much better. You have literally a house, you can cook, prepare, and it was half the price. And that's where I was going in that route. But people are like, well, you should support this because brothers are working really hard, And so you just kind of like keep it hush hush. You don't tell people what you're doing. That way you can avoid that situation. And then, then I got back to Atlanta where my congregation was hosting, and I had to make hotel reservations in Atlanta, and that was expensive too. And so it was a lot on the credit card that year. And I was pioneering and working part-time to that. And so there was a lot of pressure financially.
Mm-hmm.
What I was getting at with this is that all of this seems pretty convenient to me, but I knew people when I was in California who lived in Oregon and their district convention or regional convention was in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And so we're talking 5-hour drive, 6-hour drive. And so they had to stay in a hotel. And so there were a much more horror stories of difficulties. And you add in wife, kids, and things like that. And it made things a lot more difficult in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But regional conventions, to me, I'm a type of person that can watch 9 hours of documentaries in a row, and it does not bother me one bit. And so sitting there listening to someone talk, and I was interested in the information at the time, and so it never really bothered me in that sense. I actually used to judge other people. I was pretty judgmental witness, by the way, and I was like, oh well, these guys don't love Jehovah because look at them walking around with their baby all the time, and I didn't know any different because I never had a kid, and how did you deal with that? Did your kids like sitting there the whole time, or?
Well, let me tell you, that was having young children that, my daughter was the best out of them as far as sitting still, but even still as a young kid, they need to get up and move around and everything. And me, I love getting up and moving around because I didn't have to sit in that seat. So I would be the one, I'd be like, yeah, I'll take her. I'll go walk. And I just walk around and around,
Yeah.
And then the nice thing was, I remember before I had kids and when I was an attendant myself, you'd see people just like single people walking around, and you'd have the little keep quiet signs up, and you'd see people talking, you kind of try to split them up and move them along the way. But when you have a kid in your hand, they don't bother you. So you stop and talk with other people, and attendants left me alone, which was great, So not only did I have to not have to sit through as much of it, but I got to, talk with other people or whatever, and, made it kind of enjoyable to do that.
Yeah. It was always interesting when I see other brothers, and I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to me to think back to people I knew. Are they really in? Are they PMO? What are they? Because when I was in the accounting, for instance, department and counting all the money, we were like, bam, 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 let's count the money, put in the thing, jar. And I was going to go to my seat, listen to the program. But all of them were just still sitting there. And it seemed like everyone didn't really want to go back. And so it's just like, okay. And when I had too many privileges at the regional conventions, I went to another one to make sure I got my spiritual food. And so I always took it very seriously. And to me, and when I was in Spanish too, I also went to English as well. So because in Spanish I was a beginner, in the language. And so that was an issue for me to think about that. And it's funny you mentioned walking around, and were your kids allowed to draw?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You're a liberal father. All right, good. Well, I wasn't allowed to do none of that. I had to, as a young child, I would have to write down what scripture I heard. Not like the verse, but just write down like Matthew 3:16 or whatever. And I had to write that and keep track of what I heard. And then if it was the same scripture again, I put a check mark next to it. And so, but I was never allowed to draw pictures.
As my kids started getting a little older and could read and everything, we started, having them look up scriptures. I didn't care if they took notes or not, because I didn't see that as important, because I remember when I was younger and I would take notes at the conventions. That was the only time I ever looked at them, was when I was taking them. After that, I never looked at them again. So for my own kids, I'm like, they didn't really have to take notes because I didn't think they would look back at them anyways, because I never did. So that would have been hypocritical in my mind to be that way. But I did at least try to get them to look up the scriptures and to follow along in that capacity as they started getting a little bit older. But even then, I started my first doubt in my journey, because it took me a process of almost 10 years to fully
Yeah,
wake up, break
same.
out.
I think everyone's like that.
And so there was that whole not putting as importance on it because I didn't fully believe it, but I believed it, but I didn't fully believe it because I knew there was problems with it. The cognitive dissonance is a bitch.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I didn't push it on them to be these, ultra uber witness kids. If my kids wanted to, my daughter, I remember several times told me how she would preach at school a couple times and this and that. And I was, oh, good job, good job. But I never pushed them to do that.
Yeah.
So, when it came to that kind of stuff, I was trying to at least give them some basic training. I didn't even have a whole lot of family studies with them. We did it maybe 5 times.
Wow. Okay. Wow. You didn't even use it to manipulate them at all?
No.
What kind of witness are you? You're supposed to manipulate your children with the truth.
Well, I'm not one anymore, so.
There you go. See, what is it? Spiritual death happens with one compromise at a time. And no, that's funny. I mean, that sounds like a nice upbringing. No, my mom manipulated me the crap out of me, with scriptures. My dad did too. Everything was about manipulation, and so using guilt to control me and my brothers and stuff like that to do what they want them to do, essentially what Watchtower wants us to do, and was just a regular part of it. And so, no, I mean, I was usually really emotional at these conventions because I was hearing all the stuff and the tears coming down my eyes because I wasn't perfect and I wasn't, good enough. And so after each one, I was like, I'm going to do better, and after a convention, I think in 2009, it was Keep on the Watch, I think, thing. And I got so guilted there that I started pioneering. That was kind of how that worked out there. And many people have the same kind of stories because you literally went through 3 days of indoctrination.
Well, see, I was like that too. After the conventions, like my wife and I would talk and we'd be like, yeah, we need to do better and this and that. And we would talk about it, on the car ride home or whatever. And then we would do better for like a week or two. And then we'd just be back to our same old selves again.
Okay, interesting. That's funny to me. All right. And so they were able to draw. Okay, then they had to look up scriptures. What about so how long have you been out?
My last time I went to a meeting was in August of 2018.
Okay, so you never had to deal with your kids being teenagers then?
No.
At the conventions and running around and possibly getting in trouble or anything like that. And so that's good. Because I don't know, I used to do weird stuff as a teenager, and if you can picture like the stage and the Cow Palace, it was like a dome, and so it was round, and so the middle stage was right in the middle, and you can walk through it. And one of the most exhilarating things, and this is so silly to me now, but I guess I was 16, and at that time, at that age, me and my teenage friends were able to sit together, not with our parents. That was kind of like, oh my God. My parents kind of got in trouble for that, and in a way, because it was like, you shouldn't let them do that. And one of the most exciting things in the world was walking in front of everybody. So you have, imagine the front door and then the back door, it goes into this big circle around the Cow Palace where they have like monster truck shows that drive in there. So there's ways to get into the stage area. And so you walk through the front entrance and you go by the stage and you like look, and then you keep going until you go to the other exit for no reason. And you got like thousands of people staring at you. For some reason, that was like the most exhilarating extreme sport there was. And
you're getting away with something you're
not supposed to do. Yeah, I shouldn't be doing that. And so then like me and my friends would do that, and we'd have like different challenges, maybe circle the stage twice or something like that. And like, I don't know, these were just kind of crazy things that we as kids thought were rebellious. And so that's just kind of how that was. And I don't know, I'm going to start laughing about it. It's silly. But
Well,
no,
it is silly when you look back at it, but back then it was like, oh, this is cool. I can get away with this. You know, it was like the biggest thing you could do at the time and get away with it. And it was exhilarating at the time.
yeah,
You know, when you look at other normal teenage kids experiencing what they do and get away with, you're like, oh, that was stupid. But for the background you and I were in, no, that was like big time.
yeah. Uh, we'll wrap it up here, but let's talk about witnesses don't have a collection plate. It's something they like to brag about and say, hey, we don't collect it. But I always felt obligated to give at the regional convention. You know, by the time, you know, like, oh, you had to pay for this. And to me, it was $5 per seat. And so I always gave a $20, but $15 is what I thought was my admission ticket, you know, and if everyone did that, it would be fine. Did you ever feel like you had to, or did you not feel pressure at all?
Uh, again, I'm a horrible example because I remember I contributed a couple times throughout
Oh
the
my
year,
God.
and the most I remember doing was like $20,
Yeah,
and that was only like 2, maybe 3 times.
yeah. And there
Because
was,
I was here. Here was my, I guess my viewpoint on this was okay. Couple things. A, if this really is Jehovah's organization, my lack of contributing isn't going to make it go under. B, I have a family. I have my own expenses. I got my bills to pay. I'm already losing money and other things to come here. So I've already paid my dues in a way to come there. You know, I looked at it, well, you know, Jehovah, you know, will look down upon me and see my situation. He'll understand the effort I made and he'll appreciate that as what it is instead of me having to give money every time I'm there. So
interesting. Okay,
I was,
that's,
I rarely ever contributed. And that was even growing up as a kid, everything. I mean, there's
wow.
people say, you know, they've put thousands upon thousands of dollars in the contribution boxes over the years. I could probably tell you for a fact without doing the math, over my lifetime, less than $1,000 I've ever contributed.
Wow, okay. Yeah, I mean, man, you're like rebellious and stuff. Were you like outside smoking too?
No, you see, that was the thing. As a teenager, I was like the model kid. You know, I got
Yeah.
baptized at 13. I was a ministerial servant by the time I was 18. I pioneered for a couple of years. You know, from birth to my till I was 20, and I, you know, messed around with that first girl. I was like the perfect JW kid almost,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny to me. No, but yeah, you'd definitely be judged by witness, Matt, and that's kind of that's interesting. But no, my family always put that guilt on themselves, and my parents didn't have any money either, and my mom didn't work. Only my dad did because they were very, you know, traditional, like where the wife needs to be at home taking care of the kids and things like that. And so it was only my dad working. And no, it was always they always had that mentality, and this is kind of like you know, televangelist type things where you give money and you receive back. And so I grew up with the mentality of whatever you give to Jehovah, he'll give back to you, you know, threefold, anyways. And so money. Well, this is actually one of the benefits I think I got from being a Jehovah's Witness is where I didn't put a whole lot of importance into it, and which can also lead to other issues. But it was just always like the mentality, oh, this is Jehovah's money,
Mm-hmm.
anyways. And so just give it away and then he'll provide a job or he'll provide whatever. And that's really how I lived as a witness. And which is interesting to me now that I'm out and I'm like, well, I was able to do this and this and this, thinking that I was being backed by God and I wasn't. Imagine what I can do now, you know. And so it's just like, kind of like it's just a good thing because you had this security blanket that Jehovah always provides. Jehovah is there for you. He's your father. And
Even then, as far as that security blanket, I had an experience in my life that totally threw that out the window because I was in a congregation. I was in my mid-20s, and I had lost a job, and I was looking for other work. And there was this brother that worked at this company, and I went and applied there, and I put his name down as a reference, because he was in the same congregation as me. He wasn't that much older or anything, and I thought, hey, you know what? If it was me, and and it was a brother in the hall, I'd say, yeah, I'd recommend this person. All I got was chastised from him for putting his name down on the application. So I'm just like, really? I
Wow.
thought we were, supposed to like help each other out here and all that, take a chance or whatever, because I know me, I'm a good worker. I'm not sitting here trying to toot my own horn, but I work hard, I do my job. And so to me, that was never an issue as far as that was concerned, and he went and chastised me for putting his name down. I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So
No, you're right. And that really depended on where you were on the congregations. I use witnesses as my references all the time. I never had any stories like that. Typically speak, I've been referenced myself, and someone calls me up, oh, what do you think about this person? I'm like, oh, he's a great guy, he's a good Christian man, blah, 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 and doesn't do drugs, no drinking. These are all easy things you can say. They're all truthful, and the employers want to know this. And
right,
you don't need to say things that are untrue, and what difference does it make? It's not like he's going to come back on you somehow. So that's kind of weird
yeah.
that he would even, maybe it's because you didn't ask him first and he felt pressured or whatever like that. And so, yeah, with regional conventions, did you ever get to see one of the governing body at your regional?
No, we never had that.
Wow.
Not where I
Okay.
was at. The biggest thing we get is, visiting Bethelites directly from New York, and that was about it.
Wow, man. Okay, I've seen Brother Sidlick. I've seen Brother Genghis. I've seen Brother Pierce, Morris, Lett, Loesch, Sanderson. I'm sure I'm missing somebody there.
No,
It doesn't really matter, but yeah, I guess it depends on who was at your regional convention. Brother Barr, many times. Brother Barr was friends with my coordinator in my congregation in Knoxville. You may know the Carriers, John Carrier. He's pretty popular in that area. Okay.
no,
Well, your parents don't talk to you, right? So you can't even ask them.
no. I can ask my parents. My parents talk to me. We're fine. They're
Oh, that's right.
like I
They
said,
left. They left. Your
my parents,
wife's parents did
my
not.
wife's
Okay.
parents.
Okay. Okay.
But
Yeah. Ask them if they know who John Carrier is. I'm sure they do.
I'll ask him that.
He was really, really good friends with Jack Barr, and he was actually invited to his memorial when he
Okay.
died. And so if anybody's wanting to see one of them for some reason, you can always go to Knoxville and you can watch them. They're there every year, and due to the special connections. And Jack Barr had a fascination with Tennessee because it reminded him of Scotland, I think is where he's from, and or that area in UK. And so he went there every year. And so when he was too sickly to come, because he was old man, I think that was like 99 when he died or something stupid. And you got Brother Jackson. And then look this up. I made a video about this and about a sister, Jacqueline Dawes, and she became really good friends with Jeffrey Jackson, and she actually paid for his wedding. There, the Blackberry Farm is really like a 5-star Relais Chateau type resort in the Knoxville area. And last I got, she was in trouble with something, and she's like hiding away on a Watchtower farm. And so Jeffrey Jackson's hiding her from the police currently. And they haven't released any new information on this. This broke like 2 months ago. And so they get the Jeffrey Jackson down there and stuff in the regional conventions. And so I've met all the governing body people in that sense. But if there's anything else you want to talk about but we just wanted to go over what a regional convention was like, the difficulties of it, financial burdens, and things like that. And it's a big deal. It's never happened before in witness history for it to be canceled.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I was still in, this year would be like a great year because you wouldn't have to get a hotel. You wouldn't have to take time off work. I'm sure there's going to be many, many PMOs that are like, I can get away without going this year. This is going to be great. and just
Yeah.
catch up on the highlights. So if they are asked, they can at least talk about it. And so this is a phenomenal opportunity for them, as well as I think for all the ones who are in that still believe it, but still have a little bit of doubts. They're not quite PMOs yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and they could start, taking this opportunity to think for themselves a little bit more, and maybe do some side research that they otherwise couldn't have done because of all the extra responsibilities they would have going to the meetings and going in service and going to the conventions and all the extra preparation it takes to do all that in their lives. They're getting a break from that.
Correct. And when it comes to witnesses, and I think some of the people that keep people in the most are the elderly women.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was an influence on you, but I remember them always like pulling me aside and saying I'm doing such a good job and kind of doing that whole little henpecking thing. And even if somebody is going to all the meetings on Zoom, and watching the conventions, watching the memorial, watching all the meetings on Zoom, you don't have that constant community henpecking with you. You're going to have your
Yeah,
mom, but you kind of like
when I
just
think
miss her.
about a Zoom meeting, they could be sitting there like we're talking right now. Let's say this is our meeting, and they could be on their phone, jwfax.com, and, all that, acting like they're looking up the scriptures and looking up other stuff at the same time. So
No, it's definitely, everyone's addicted to technology anyways. It's definitely a temptation, and so it's going to be there. And so, yeah, I mean, this definitely will affect their numbers, I think, a lot. However, with pandemics and world issues, typically, though, people do turn back to their traditions to feel comfort, because if you, like, I don't know, watching mainstream media and you think the world is coming to an end, you could be that type. And so they're like, oh my God, pestilence everywhere. Matthew was right, and Jesus was right, and all this stuff. And so you run back to the Kingdom Hall. And things like this can have the opposite effects, or it can have the effect of getting people out. And so
yeah,
I'm hoping it'll help people. There's definitely, it's not hard to find anything now on the internet. It's not like when we were growing up in the 90s, for instance. I knew who Ray France was. I was aware of 1975, and I thought it was arrogant for the witnesses to make such a prediction, because it clearly says no one knows, and in the Bible. But I was like, well, that was that generation, and we're getting better, and I truly believe that. And so it was always like we were getting better.
Well, see, for that, I gave them even more lenience, because I was like, well, they made a mistake and they admitted it, and we moved on. So that shows that they have a humble attitude.
But did they admit it though? They really just blamed people.
Well, I had thought they did.
Yeah.
Just because I knew about it. I was obviously I was born after that. I was born in '82. So, I growing up, hearing about it, because my parents and my grandparents lived through it. So I got the impression that they admitted it because I knew about it.
Okay. Yeah. And so that's a whole nother story, but unless you have anything else to say, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you for coming on the channel, and we definitely should do this again about something else though, because we're like literally the same generation. So it's fascinating to talk to you about it, because of just a different perspective of it. So that's just my thoughts. But unless you have anything else to say, we will come.
No, that's it. I mean, we'll catch up another time and talk about something else.
All right, awesome.